Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we are, as you can see, in a round table live with the participants as, in contrast to our usual hangouts that happen from country to country. Today I have the opportunity to be in Sweden, and I've been in Sweden for quite a while now. And this is what I'll be sharing along with my hosts here in Sweden, Anna Brix Thompson and Victor Persson. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Thank you for allowing me to be here as well. And so we will be discussing for our audience, in essence, what the experience has been for me coming from Mexico as a person of the third world, sorry, and coming to the first world, meaning that complete new reality that I came to witness here of what is to live in a place where living rights are considered, where there is an infrastructure, an environment that is supportive not only for human beings, for animals, for nature, and everyone seems to have like a standard of living that makes them joyful, cheerful toward immigrants even. And so everything that I've seen here has become like a point of contrast that I've made in relation to Mexico. So first of all, before I forget, we have questions and comments available for everyone watching on YouTube. You have to click in the frame that says be part of the conversation, Q&A. With your Google account, you're able to make questions. And so just feel free to also contradict, join in, say if we're on the right track of what we perceive as the first world. And that's what we will be mostly focusing on. So guys, first of all, I'd like to share with you what my first impression was in terms of being here, which was, well, this is a society that generally cares about the individuals that live here, which means the living environment contains or considers nature, considers people's well-being in terms of having clean streets. I see, police hovering all around the neighborhoods, for example. And I see that, like for example, where you live in, there's nature like encrusted or integrated into the buildings where people live. The roads are very nice. The people seem to be quite affable. And this all is something that in Mexico City, where I mostly live in, it's something that doesn't really exist. And when we talk about first world, it's inevitable to speak about money. So when I come here, it's like, of course, my currency is half the Swedish kroner. So to me, this living standard is just non-viable. It is non-sustainable. Yet I see that where there is money, there is what I would call even best for all conditions. And I've seen some conditions here that I would name as maybe not the most ideal, and this is what we're here to discuss, an example of what would be best for all. So first of all, let's look at a point in terms of wages, because I see that some people might make just bare enough, or maybe it's a good wage that you get and that's why people are happy, or I perceive them as happy. What would you guys say about this? You want to start?
Yeah, I would say that in Sweden we do have a wage equilibrium where even though you have a job that is that doesn't require lots of education, it doesn't require any particular skill, such as, for example, the people that come and collect our garbage.
Right.
You do have, in comparison with other categories of jobs, for example, a teacher or,
well, we researched the point today, and I'm a teacher, and we actually realized that the people that collect the garbage, they earn a higher wage than a teacher. And it's not to say that the teacher is more important, because I would say that it's actually completely equally important. But it's interesting to consider how in other countries, the maybe not in comparison with a teacher, but in comparison to other occupations, the difference would be very, very vast.
Yeah, exactly.
And there is a very high minimum standard here as well, a high minimum wage, which is very adhered to. And it's not that common that companies go very much under the minimum. But then we also have to consider, so that could be a pro. A con is that the living standards are also, or sorry, not the living standards, but the living costs. The food is very expensive. The housing is very expensive. But I would say that here in Sweden, someone on a minimum wage working as a cleaner or garbage collector, or me as a teacher, you still have usually so much money that you can buy a little bit of clothes, that you can maybe even have a car. And I know that for people in some countries, that is actually considered middle class.
Yeah, exactly. That's what was so shocking, because I'm used to seeing the people that collect my garbage. I have to even give them a little bit of money because their wage is so miserable, and they are looking like very rough, almost like bums, people that live in the streets, almost working for as garbage collectors. And here I saw them, and it's just like a regular middle class person being very affable and very adamant in doing their job. Whereas I see the people in, for example, Mexico, I see that in their faces they're just not liking the job. Why? Because the whole infrastructure of even collecting garbage is deficient. The trucks are old. There is no major awareness of separating garbage or something like that. That's barely being implemented. So, and you can see that, well, you have to give them money yourself, because the money that the government was supposed to give to them is not getting to their hands. So it's mostly low level income people. And here you can see a little bit more of that equality, so to speak.
Well, they get, for example, they get really good equipment. They get safety shoes. They get very nice uniforms, but not like to have it look like a uniform, but like work clothes. They don't have to use their own clothes. They get replaced. They don't have to pay for that. So they have and the trucks are, for example, they're very high tech. So they don't have to carry a lot of stuff.
Everything is automated. I was fascinated just by looking outside the window and seeing how they don't even have to touch any of the garbage. Whereas in Mexico, only now they're using like just latex gloves just to kind of protect themselves. But before, it was touching people's garbage like that, and it's just so insane that this garbage is like going fully open throughout the city. I mean, focal infection, it's very possible and everything. And here, of course, these things that you guys might see as well, it's a standard. It's how it's always been. To me, it's like, wow, that's almost like a luxury service. So what would you say it isn't a luxury or an availability in a third world? What's going on? What's the reason?
Yeah.
That's a very difficult question to answer, and I wouldn't say that it's because the thing is that you also have to look at the history of countries and the politics and the culture and how everything has been created up until now. But obviously there is money in Sweden, and it's not just people sitting with their money in their home. There is money in the society on a collective level, a sort of an agreement towards everybody contributes in one way or another to making the environment functional for everyone. And there's even a pride and a like a point of wanting to advance. Like they're always trying to make things better. For example, with the road system, if they see, oh, there's a lot of accidents in this cross section, they will send out people to investigate, and then they'll set up new signs or whatever. So there's this constant, like, there's a pride and a consideration of making the communal environment best for everyone.
Yeah, you were mentioning about the demographics, that Sweden is the nation that has been taking account of like all the necessities of the people, which is rarely done, for example, in a third world country where the corporations' interests are over people's well-being, of course, where our taxes are simply used for the hands of the very few politicians that have access to that. Whereas here, we were also discussing before this hangout about taxes, because I would personally agree with their perspective that, well, give us your perspective about taxes and why you see that is a part of contributing to this general well-being.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, Firstly, in relation to the other question, I can also say that, I mean, the reason as to why there is such a effective welfare here in Sweden, I don't think it's very much dependent on the Swedish mindset, so to speak. Because we can look back in the history of Sweden, for example, 200 years ago, when Sweden was actually a place of great suffering, lots of sickness, famine, and so many Swedish persons they went abroad, for example, America. And so, why it's so hard to answer this question, why is it that we have this welfare in Sweden, is probably due to how unpredictable the money system is, and that in many ways it's just, what do you say, destiny, or no, slew. So,
random.
yeah, randomness. Yeah, it just became like that. Now we have the money, and then people have the nourishment and the housing to have the energy to care about the society as a whole.
But the thing is that this region of the world has traditionally been social democratic. So there has been politically a consideration of the social whole, because you have other countries where there is also a lot of money, but people are sitting on them, so it's not being shared, or, well, not that it's shared in that way here either, but there is this social dimension.
Because we have America as an example, you know, there's the highest inequality in the world, whereas if that vast accumulation of wealth was distributed onto more people, then America wouldn't be subsumed in the poverty that it is now. So we have a comment or question. Can you read it, Anna, please?
It says, what would you consider a first world area?
Cool question. Who wants to go for that?
It is from Ethan Ash.
Hello, Ethan.
So the first world countries are the countries that has the highest living standards. And I want to say that I actually looked at the word first world country the other day, and it sounds very elitist. It sounds very like
first class.
Yeah,
premium.
first class,
Exactly.
or we're the winners. But it's not like that. It is simply the countries that have the highest living standards, the most money, the most developed infrastructures, from
and
my
social
perspective.
Security, you know.
Yes.
That's a great point as well.
Yes. And third world countries would be the countries with the most poverty, the most crime, the most under or undeveloped infrastructures. And like Victor's saying, I actually agree that there is a high level of randomness in it, which, in 2,000 years or in 500 years, it could be Sweden that's the underdog and China that's on top. It doesn't really matter. It's not because we have some kind of genetic disposition making us, but it's like how the puzzle pieces fell, that we happen to have a social democratic ruling, and then there is also the money. There's also colonization involved. But about the taxes you were asking about, like I explained to Malin before the hangout that throughout my life, you could say that I grew up socialist, but we don't see, or at least in my culture, socialist is not seen as this totalitarian, horrible. It is seen as like common consideration for other people. Exactly. But you could say that I grew up socialist. So for me, paying taxes is a completely natural part of life. And Malin I think you were asking me, like, if you had a choice, would you not do it? It's like, no, of course not. That's completely normal. Why shouldn't I pay taxes?
Yeah, because many people complain about paying high taxes in first world countries, for example. And that is something that, for example, in Mexico, you have to pay income taxes, but you don't see that reflected in the infrastructure, in the wages of people, in the entire infrastructure of the cities and so forth, which then as a citizen makes you feel that your government is not doing enough. But it's what I see in Sweden, and what is kind of like the example that I also want to share, is that as you have or when you have this kind of environmental stability and support, and the system in itself is supportive, then you as a human being immediately like integrate yourself into that. Like I could have any other habit or way of doing things in Mexico, like crossing the streets without considering whatever. But here, coming here, as you see how people act and interact with each other and how the rules are set up, and you see that it's functional and that it is supportive and that it's a secure environment, then you become a participant and you integrate yourself into it because you understand that yes, this makes sense. I mean, from things as simple as how the garbage is divided, or how they have methods to mow the lawns with very high-tech machines, and it doesn't take just one gardener, for example, in the third world working 12 hours on just this piece of land, whereas here it's just one machine and the guys have fun. I mean, those shitty jobs here really don't exist.
I would disagree with that.
Okay, tell me.
Well,
yeah.
I can just, before we leave the tax point,
yeah, let's go back to that.
So I would just like to say that there is another dimension to the point you mentioned, whereas you took up this point where you do want to pay the taxes.
Well, it's not that I want to pay the taxes, but I see the point of me contributing to get, for example, healthcare and nice roads, as well as supporting people who are sick, for example.
Yeah, and so there is this other dimension, and for example, in my family lineage, this has been a point that has come up where, in particular, the income tax system is seen as unfair, because in a way, with income tax, you're not taxed by, like, in relationship to how you utilize the services of society. It's more that you're taxed on your income. So from my perspective, like, a tax that would cause less friction would be then the value-added tax.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And it's what Living Income Guaranteed actually proposes, because we do see also many people from the first world leaving these places due to this income tax. And that is not beneficial, because if a company closes, then there's less employment, for example. And what Living Income Guaranteed actually proposes is that this income tax is simply abrogated. It's deleted, it doesn't apply. And the reason being that, well, I fully agree with what Victor just explained, that if that money is your payment, then why should we take from that to give back to the government? Rather just give a good income so that you can actually buy, and with the stuff that you buy, which is value-added tax, then you can pay and contribute with your taxes. So it is also like a full retribution for your work, and nothing gets taken from you from that, but rather you contribute through buying, through making the economy grow, in fact, and not seeing your salary or your wage being reduced from the get-go. So I see that makes sense, and it's cool reference also that people in the first world, for example, can see that is what makes sense. And in the third world, of course, because maybe the taxes aren't as high, but still, I mean, you earn less money than here, of course. There's the whole currency conversion as another topic, but that also makes people psychologically believing that they are maimed or tampered by the government itself. And that's where the whole rivalry toward the government begins. Like, oh, they're asking me for taxes and they're taking my wage. So this is also what we propose as living income, that figure of the income tax isn't something that creates this rivalry of they take my money, but rather how can I contribute back to society, as you were saying, through what I consume. So that is what we see makes sense. If you have another idea or suggestion of what could work, please place it in the comments or question as well. So are we good with the points thus far? So next point, I'd like to take on which really astounded me, because we know that education, for example, in America, it's certainly something that is taking people to an endless debt roll. And here, you don't pay for education.
No, we get paid.
Exactly. They get paid for studying. And that is like, what? It is something that, yes, it should be like that, because we've heard stories from American people that they have to go to college, they have to do their homework, their studies, and at the same time work a 40-hour job, which is what any other person would do without studies. Here, for example, they have to do both things, study and go to their job to make their basic needs fulfilled, to have them fulfilled. That doesn't really make sense. Why? Because the student will then not be like sufficiently rested, well fed to be a high achievement student, for example. And it's just like wanting to get through the school system to get that job, and it's all like survival, debt. So how do you see this affects the students here and the general living? Because I mean, education is the foundation of the rest of your life.
Well, first I would say that unfortunately, or yeah, I mean, this money, this grant, you could say that you're given, everyone is given that, or all citizens, is quite on the boundaries. It's on the limit of what, like, we would not be able to live here on that, for example, and have food. So you either have to work, but you don't have to, of course, work 40 hours. Then maybe you have like a student job on the side, which is a lot less, or you take student loans. So it is set up so that you can barely survive on it. You have to, most people get student loans. So that's also a point to consider. I will say, and this is a con, is that it has the effect that people take education for granted. And this is not to say that then it should be paid just so that people wouldn't take education for granted, because that's not a way to get people to appreciate education either. But I do see that education is taken for granted. And I did not meet people from America, for example, until I was already in university and realized that they have to pay. And it was a complete shock to me. I never realized that I had taken education for granted. And it means that a lot of people don't pay attention. They don't care. And they also can like switch education to education because it's not seen as that much of a self-responsibility. It's more like, what do I dream of becoming and what do I want to be when I grow older? Of course, there are people that take their education seriously, for sure. But yeah, what do you say?
Yeah, I actually had a fascinating sort of culture realization when I was looking to apply for a exchange student position in America. And so there was these travel stories that past students had then written when they had been exchange students. And like one fascinating aspect that they described was how the American students would sit in the libraries from 8 in the morning to 12 at night, like study. And that is not something you see here in Sweden. And that is a direct consequence of the fact that these students in America pay, I don't know how much, but a lifetime of savings to go to that education. So they only have one chance. While we here in Sweden, we don't have it like that. An education here with loans maybe cost $30,000 or something.
We can say that it is limited, though. You can't just will, and this is something that changed while we were growing up. You cannot just continue forever. So you have like a certain amount of money so that you can maybe change educations 1, 2, maximum 3 times, and then the money would run out. Yeah. So they put a law to it, but still.
So I mean, here you can go to higher education and utterly fail, and it will still not influence your life to the extent where you destroy your entire future.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so that's a primary thing, because in America you might even graduate with honor and everything, but you have a $30,000-$40,000 debt on your back, which is what really keeps you in that low level position, because you have to first get out of debt to be able to make it into the system, which is obviously so why in the living income we propose giving that living wage or living income precisely to students, so that they don't have to work and they don't have to be getting into the workforce or getting into this living in the system reality with this amount of debt. It really doesn't make sense. It's like once again um, disabling our walking into the system by bonding us to debt. So that is how we then prevent debt, by giving money to people to be able to study, which is like the foundation of also first world, for example. And it's something that I'd like to also discuss with you, Anna, because you were mentioning about the standards, like at statistics level, they might seem like, oh, everyone is well educated, but is this so? Or do statistics sometimes give?
Yeah, well, what I've seen, this was because I'm from Denmark originally. I don't know if it's the same here. I suppose it is, because these Scandinavian countries are very similar. So there's a very high level of university educated people. I think we have like a high school graduation level in Sweden of 90%. 90% of the youth population graduate high school. But then I realized that the universities, I don't know about the high schools anymore, but the universities get money, get funding according to how many students graduate. So they want people to graduate. So when I was in school, I was with people, like Victor was saying, that was like, how can this person graduate? How is it even possible? They've never even been here. They've never opened a book. And that's a little bit scary. And there is this inflation, I would say, also, is that the university degrees or education has been pushed. But then you have people, I remember as a 17-year-old, I worked in a kindergarten with a 30-year-old woman who had taken a master in political science. We were earning the same wage because she couldn't get a job. So, I mean, that's the thing, is that there is a dark side to these benefits, so that it's so amazing you can get an education, but are you really being educated? And what are you going to do with it? Because if you're going to have to work in a kindergarten, then what's the point? So, yeah, so it's like, what is interesting is that, like we've been discussing, there are so many cool things about this society. But and I see that it's because there's also a lot of it where it's seen in isolation, like there isn't the consideration that we're part of a bigger world. So that it becomes a lot about like what makes you happy and what do you want to do with your life, and rather than like how can I contribute or how can I best make use of my skills. And so people end up in their mid-30s before they realize, shit, I should have taken this seriously, and then it's too late, Yeah.
And also what I came to conclude as part of my investigation being around here, and specifically looking at how things operate here, is that to also not take this as, oh, they're great and everything works fine. That's why we're also having this conversation, to look at a little bit also at the less view seen of how this environment as a first world operates. But also sometimes it can be a facade, like how beautiful the city is or how everything is taken care of, to problems that not only exist here but all around the world, and that will not cease to exist unless we actually get into how the system operates. Because for me as a tourist, I can have a great experience and the people are very affable and enchanting and very willing to help you and lend you stuff if you are new in the neighborhood. I mean, that is something that, what I've seen in the first world, it is a very survival driven and paranoid mentality. Third world. Yeah, I said first world. Yeah, in the third world, where I come from, which is Mexico, Latin America, South Africa, that we have also been there. it's the same kind of mentality that, you know, you can get robbed, you can get raped, you can get stolen things and stuff like that. But that is also is existing here. Actually, we witnessed a minor theft, so to speak, and that's because immigrants actually come here, which we also have made a specific hangout with Anna and Victor on the immigration in Sweden, which we will be placing as notes on the show, because that is also what causes or disrupts these, what I would call a little bit of a utopia from coming from the third world, and me not knowing like the ins and outs of the system as well.
Can I add something else?
Sure.
Because we also talked about the students taking their education for granted, and there is actually a disadvantage with everything being so automized, so perfect. You just step into it, like you said, and then you're just a part of it and everything flows, is that we don't learn self-responsibility.
Yeah.
And the thing is that we tend to, in this world, we tend to see things in extremes. So then it's like, no, you need to, you know, pay your own money, and like the only alternative would be to have a hard, brutal life so that you can learn. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't, like, you don't need to have a harsh life to learn to take responsibility for your life, but you also cannot just be given everything. And yes, and because we're not part of, you know, the system operates, we're not part of it, we just take advantage of it, I would say, if we're to put it like really bluntly. We're not expected to take responsibility. That the taxes is probably the only thing.
Right.
And then, you know, you can expand it from Sweden to the rest of the world, where it's like, well, you know, we have it so good here, you know, they could just do the same. Why?
Yeah, why aren't they doing that?
Yeah.
And that's part of the question that we were asking before, which has to do entirely with how the system operates, and that as a solution, we see that the best way to kind of not get into these inequalities at a worldwide level is to provide a living income guaranteed, especially supporting the people in the third world so that we can optimize the living standard to what I see here. Definitely a cool living standard. I mean, you have nature, you have people, nature being considered, to give context, for example, like houses, having that ability to have a little patch of nature, wood, like area, or where people can go and have picnics.
Yeah, like for example, on the bus stop, there are special tiles which are created for the blind people so that they can walk with their, what is it called? The thing, with their cane. Yeah, and then they can feel these special tiles so that they'll know where the bus stop is. Stuff like that that's a really good example of how people are considered on even the structural levels.
Yeah, and I'd like to add in here with a point of apathy, because I've been a student here now for the last 3 years, and I mean, it's a recurring point that I see in many youngsters in Sweden, that there is a apathy and a lethargia. I mean, a sense of not realizing the potential to create one's future and one's life that exists here in Sweden.
Right.
And I think that's one of the downsides of the social democracy in Sweden, which is very centered around a strong government agency, and that this government agency is like
a super mother,
like paternalist to the
exactly. And as you know, a child to a very strong mother, you don't learn to create your own life. You might even get to the point where you don't even care about it, because my decisions won't be recognized and seen.
Yeah, and she's so good at it, why should I?
Yeah.
And then other people see, but then other people see and like, oh my god, what an awesome mother you have. Yeah, it's cool. I can have whatever I want. She begs me.
Yeah, it's like a very paternalist system, which is also the downsides when we are, as you guys are saying, you just get integrated into this, and you don't even get to know like how things are done or how things got to be this nice or that living standard, which is similar to the affluenza, for example, that you know, this you can research, of course, what affluenza means as the disease of the rich, the kids from rich people, which means the parents were the ones that placed the effort and that built maybe a company to get to a very wealthy state, and the kids become like these spoiled individuals that, well, you know, I'm disoriented because I have everything in life, and you know, it's like being really apathetic and not really careful or even considerate of the world outside. So it can become like that kind of the disease, would you say, here as a first world, from in context to the third world or the rest of the world in general.
And I've seen, like, for myself, because I've been a victim to this disease quite severely.
Right.
But a point that really assisted me to get out of this was actually conscription. And in Sweden, before, when I was 18, then we had the military conscription of 1 year. And I saw that this was a cool point of, you know, sort of you being asked to give of yourself to society, sort of, okay, now it's time to sort of give back. And I see that that can be a solution applied for, you know, peaceful points, not war, but maybe a conscription of 2 years where you have to take responsibility for the basic facilities of your municipality, for example.
Your environment at home, like around, like participating in waste management, or elderly, or children, maybe, if possible, or that kind of stuff where you and we've also seen this in terms of how you learn responsibility through actually integrating yourself in producing something that is for the benefit of everyone, in essence. That would be very cool, something as well to consider in terms of what living income would provide, because then you wouldn't do it just for the sake of getting the money because you're giving money, but for the sake of learning how, if we all become like socially integrated within this responsibility, this sense of social responsibility, then it won't be something that you have to learn in a bad way through living in a third world, for example, or suddenly going broke because you weren't learning the value of money as getting your basic needs and you went overboard with it. Like learning the real effort that takes to create things and to create a nice living standard, which is work in the end. I mean, yes, we have machines and everything, but there's people behind that making decisions. So it also goes back to principles, which is quite important.
There's some comments.
Yeah, please read them.
Okay, so Andres is saying, hi guys, here in Colombia, in the universities, we need to pay for our studies and then work to get money to pay for what we've studied. And then he says, using the debt system, of course, but in most cases, it's the only option.
Well, yeah, that's definitely something that it's like a disease of the world as well in many countries.
Sorry, it's knocking on the door.
Someone is knocking on the door. And well, that's a very cool point, Victor. That was from Ingrid. If you would like to tell us, Ingrid, which point was that specifically? And using the debt system, of course, but okay, that was read. So thanks, Andres, for your comment. And yes, when we become subject to debt system, of course, everything will be plunging into a third world, because debt is enslavement, and part of providing a living income is also to eradicate this debt. Not to say, okay, we will all of a sudden be like individuals liberated from debt, but it will be a process where instead of giving money and through creating further changes in how these loans operate, and really valuing the meaning of what is it to pay for an education, and how I see it is that paying for an education is counterproductive to your own productivity later on, because you will have to be earning money while you work in the system, and then you have to pay for that debt, which doesn't really make you experience the fruit of that work. And then that becomes a counterproductive experience as well, which, for example, in America, in Latin America, where debt exists, that becomes like part of the the psyche, also the experience that you have as a continuous survival, which here I don't see as much, but you guys also will be able to tell me more about it. But I know that there's a question that we also didn't get to in terms of like the bad jobs or the jobs that no one really wants to do. We didn't get to that.
Yes. So yeah, so you were saying that it seems like no jobs are really bad jobs.
Yeah. So
but what we've seen, or what I've seen, is that there are the real shitty jobs which no one wants, which is, for example, cleaning toilets. And as far as I have seen, the only people that do that are the immigrants. And not like, there are different groups of immigrants, but especially the ones that don't speak Swedish. And there is also an issue with illegal immigrants, because Sweden has traditionally been very open to immigrants, but the rules have gotten more strict now. So, I mean, I've talked to people, and it's very ambivalent, because they earn like, I met a guy from Nigeria who is cleaning in a kindergarten, and I mean, that's quite a nice job. I mean, and he earns quite a lot of money. But the thing is that you also see what everyone else has access to. Like, for him, it might be a lot of money compared to Nigeria, but compared to other Swedish people, it's not such a good life. And it's quite difficult to also make friends with people. And so it's kind of like this step for society, that everything looks so pretty and everything is so nice, but you don't really know what's going on in people's houses. And like, he was kind of desperate to get to know someone, and they want to, and you know, if you want to learn that language, for example.
Yeah.
So that's something that I see is
in the background, so to speak.
Yes, because everyone is very nice and very polite. They would not spit at you or yell at you, but they maybe also not invite you into their home, and you may not ever be able to get into and actually get, you know, we have people coming from Pakistan or Iran who have doctoral degrees or are engineers, and they have to drive a taxi because their education is considered inferior.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say here that this problem, I mean, what we're seeing here is actually but the consequence of, you know, a ineffectively regulated capitalistic system where, you know, weapons are allowed to be sold, which consequently creates wars and creates the point of immigrants.
Yeah.
And really what we're trying to do here in Sweden is to, you know, solve a problem not by its root, but by trying to sort of stop the bleeding while internal bleeding still goes on.
Putting a Hello Kitty band-aid on it.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, we've discussed also in previous hangouts, Niklas, another Swedish person, has also exposed, for example, Sweden's involvement in weapon making and weapon production. So I also see that you know, these countries that tend to have this very facade or a facade of neutrality, or everything is fine, and we are not part of NATO, for example, Sweden is not part of NATO, and they become very indignated if they see that, oh, they violated their airspace with this news recently that some US aircraft uses Swedish airspace. Oh no, it's like Swedish people became kind of like upset about it because they see themselves as very neutral. But in terms of money or providing with weapons for war, that's another story. And that is also part of what I see. It's the con of the first world, that they provide also kind of, or they create the tools to problems in the world as well. And we don't get to see that.
Yeah, and we also have to consider that no country has been created or exists in complete isolation, because there is this perception that that is who we are. Like, we are, without wanting to say it, we're like a superior race, is what people think. It seems, you know, we're peaceful. If they are not peaceful, then it's because they're barbaric, and where we're not seeing all the interconnected relationships. Like, well, maybe their houses got bombed with our weapons, for example.
And getting the immigrants that flow from the wars that are waged with the weapons that, for example, a place like Sweden or any other first world provide. So here also a clarification that it's not to make it like something personal as a nation or me being Mexican and then no, it's about understanding. We always reinforce this idea that it's not to take sides here, but to always see what can be used, like investigating all the things and learning from it so that we can use it to create a system that can be beneficial for everyone. And within that good living standard, we also have the not so good considerations and outflows of that, which is what we are mentioning here, so that we all become aware of, yes, there is a really bad situation in the third world, and also learning to link the dots of how first world is involved in that as well, or how the third world people become kind of spiteful toward the first world and say, for example, well, I've always been poor because the first world comes and robs us, so I will just go to the first world and get my money back through social benefits, for example.
Yeah, like we said, it's rather random who is in which position, which also brings us back to the point that why isn't it then equal?
Exactly.
If it's a random.
Yeah, like why is it that where we are born defined that I'm a third world person and they are not, that they live in first world? I mean, it doesn't really make sense. And what we are also advocating here is for that sense of equality, not in the sense of, oh, you know, we all want to live like Swedish people. No, we all have different cultures, different settings. It's not possible to live exactly like this, but the considerations that are here can be used as a platform, can be used as a blueprint of what is functional, while working a lot with the principles, with becoming more responsible, with not just getting everything on a golden platter. We have some comments, Anna. Can you please read?
Yeah. So the first one that was a part of Andres. Then we have Ingrid saying the point of using 1 or 2 years to give back to society in a peaceful way and serve and contribute instead of military serving.
Okay, that's a comment.
Cool,
yeah, from Victor, from what you said. So yeah, contributing back to society in a way that you become more aware, like social service. Like, for example, I studied in a Jesuit school, and you would have like these rural experiences or labor experiences where you would go and work for free, and it does give you a sense of, okay, this is how many hours a person works, but it becomes like this side view experience when you know that you with that education can make more money, and so it becomes just a faint consideration of what other people are going through, instead of saying, well, I would like them to work less hours, for example, and have more money. Why? Because then that would mean that buying more or consuming or just planning your life based on what you really want to be and become, it won't make you just a person that lives in that survival mode, but really genuinely satisfy yourself and your standard of living individually and collectively. Like if everyone is satisfied, then there's less competition, there's less corruption, there's like a collective agreement to do good, so to speak, or to support each other. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can actually share a real-time little interesting story. You heard that it was knocking on the door before. So in terms of Sweden and how people can be helpful, that was actually not my neighbor bringing my cat up, and the cat had walked up with her in the elevator, just, and then she comes and brings our cat back. Yeah, and that's something that we've seen a lot here, and also for me, coming from another country, that has been very different than what I'm used to. That people actually help each other, and what we've discussed is that it's because everything is taken care of, which it could be and it should be, in terms of, I know that I have food, I know that if my fridge breaks, I can have it repaired. If I get sick, I can simply go to a doctor. So that means that once those points of considerations are taken care of, we actually have the space to start seeing each other and caring for each other as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like you are no longer in that survival mode, which I see very much in the third world. We become subject to our own competition, our own rivalry, our own selfishness, because you have to make more than the neighbor, or else you will simply see yourself as less than, or the government is bad to you, so you have to cheat to make more, and all these things that become part of one's nature. And that's what I was talking about when you integrate yourself into this environment, like you find that good quality, so to speak, that you can become as a human being when you learn how to support others, for example, and do this kind of acts that might be like very simple, but in Mexico or Latin America, maybe it's not as easy to get that. And that's just because of that economic survivalism, so to speak. So I do see how it has changed me, like living here, not having to be paranoid about being robbed, being, followed or whatever, the same way that I would be, for example, in Mexico, where you have this constant mentality of, well, there's things that can happen to you, there's things that can be stolen from you because people need it. So, which are these other?
Yeah, that one is still Ingrid's, the top one.
Yeah.
So we can close that and then take the next one. So it's from Rebecca, or you can close that one.
Okay.
She says, we all know how to share. We have charities to share and help. Why don't we stop and ask why we're sharing as a reaction instead of as sharing because we see something is needed?
Well,
do people give a lot to charities in Sweden?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so as well.
I've seen, for example, they give a lot of money to the immigrants, and in terms of that, there's a whole another story on it. But I see that then there's this sense of, well, I get my groceries and I go out of the supermarket. Specifically, is the only place where I've seen people asking for money. It's not Swedish people, it's immigrants specifically, and they get the money, or they give the money just because maybe that sense of, well, I don't feel so bad maybe, and I just give this charity. But they're probably maybe not looking at the whole context of why they came into this country in the first place, why their country is not doing good economically. And so it's about really looking at, the entire construction of the system and how we have made it in a way that there's first world and third world, which shouldn't exist. So we're about to close. Anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I can share with this point of why many many are attracted to charities, and it's probably, as you say, Marlon, that it's about that this overview is missing, and instead of looking at a point like in the context as to how it's been created, like the multidimensionality of it is just seen as that singular moment. And what tends to happen is that we react in some form of experience, and we get this, experience, I see point.
Like having a sponsored child, for example.
Yeah.
In that moment.
So like problem, oh shit, and then money, okay, I feel better,
exactly.
Good. And so what we can do here as a solution is then to, when we see such a point, as for example a beggar, to practice looking at, asking the questions, but why is that person begging there? I mean,
exactly.
It's from another country. How has the person gotten there? Okay, so you
like,
get...
how is their country doing? Why are they here? Yeah, it's just like the basic awareness that maybe when you have it so well and so comfortable, it's easy to also, to me, like get very well and very cozy into this environment. And whereas in Mexico, it's like in your face every time that you see that there's no such good living standards. So you have it more in a more palpable way that yes, there is solutions required. And here it is more like a decision that you guys have also made to become more aware of how the world
and it does
operates.
not come easily. We've had to push ourselves to
very
bring
important.
like it's like you exist in this happy bubble. And there is also like this la 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 la, I don't see anything outside of me, and it's that like really been a pushing. I'm seeing, okay, I want to see reality, I want to know what's really going on, I don't want to stay in this bubble. Because the thing is that when your life can just flow and be easy and you can have like a nice job, and why should you? Well, because you're a part of this world, and that's it, because everything is here equally together. It's one world. Yeah,
exactly. And that is also what we suggest for everyone, because we tend to get very blinded by our comfort. So research about your locality, research about, if you know someone from another country that you see, oh, they're an immigrant, but where do they come from? How is our nation doing? What are they doing here? And what do they have that such need? And why haven't we as world community done anything to actually give a living condition that is suitable for everyone in this world?
And also to question that which is taken for granted. And the tricky thing about that is that you might not even know what you're taking for granted. And that's why it's so cool to, for example, communicate with people from other countries who will ask questions that will be like, whoa, I never considered that before. Exactly. So, question even what you think you know about your country or your own culture, because that can really expand your vision.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then about this point of researching something, what I would suggest is to begin with something very simplistic. For example, I've decided to research the multidimensionality of my iPhone. To look at, but where is this assembled? Who makes it? Where does the components come from?
Right.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Like becoming aware of how things are also made. They're not just bought with money, but that involves labor, resources, it's taken for granted when you have like this comfort of money as well.
And it involves the entire world. You will see that it involves all kinds of processes.
Yeah, which we would be able to talk about an entire day of that, but
maybe you can have Victor come back when he's investigated the iPhone
cool as well. But in terms of this hangout, the purpose was also to give a glimpse of the questions that you can also ask yourself when you go to a new country or meet someone over the internet, and really get into that kind of relationships with one another, which I see it's also quite supportive, as we're doing here with the Living Income Guaranteed team and people that support a world that can be more equal and supportive. So thanks a lot for watching, guys, and see you next time, next Sunday at the same time on another hangout. Leave your questions or comments for Anna, Victor, or myself as part of this experience, and see you next time. Thanks a lot, and remember that we are always asking you also to give us questions in terms of or suggestions for topics, or if you want to participate, that's also an option. So you can always contact us at the links in the info section. Goodbye.
Bye.
Good news.